Paulette.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Your camera isn't working. Okay, well, that makes sense. That's why I can't see you.
Yeah, it's some sort of glitch that occurs sometimes, but nothing I've done so far has allowed it to come back. I think it will. I just probably haven't had the time to like sift through all my internet resources about it. So
Gotcha.
anyway.
Yeah. So you had mentioned a new timeline for our grants discussions. Is that going to happen?
Let me, and as I was working through the minutes, I realized that you asked for that to be sent to you. IURA did not meet last month, or in September. We were going to also just discuss it with them. And so in discussing with Nels, I asked, should I bring a resolution to this committee? And he said, well, actually, as long as we fulfill all of the HUD's requirements, there doesn't need to be a resolution. So I was like, okay. So yes, I think, after much discussion internally, we've decided that we would like to try that, at least for this upcoming year.
Okay.
So I'm searching, sorry, it's very hard for me. You'd think after all this time I'd be better at multitasking while I'm on a Zoom, but let me find the calendar.
So we're looking at like a December 1st beginning to this.
Yeah, what would happen is December 1st, we would release, or the first week of December, we would release the RFP to people. The organizational meetings that need to occur might occur at the November meeting of NI or IURA, but I've also, when I've looked over our notes, I think we've also done it in the past. We've also done it in the same month as the RFP was released. So I will get that. Again, I don't think it says that you have to do it at a certain date. It just says that you need to do this as part of the beginning of the process. So
it's coming up. That's the only reason I was wondering.
Oh my goodness, it's coming up.
Hi, Carl.
Fast.
Sorry, I'm eating. That's why I'm not on visual. Okay.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
And Carl, my camera's broken, like not broken permanently. It's just not connecting for some reason right now.
Okay. We're expecting everyone this morning.
We might not see Teresa today.
Okay.
I received an email from her last night, and it sounded like she wouldn't make it. I just received an email from her again, and looks like she's not going to be joining us today.
Okay.
Okay, Tracy.
Hi, Carl.
Morning, Tracy.
How are
Hi,
you?
Tracy.
Anissa, Paulette, anybody else? No.
Fernando is, I believe Fernando will be coming, and Teresa will not be coming today.
Oh, okay.
And Anissa, what time did we tell Liddy to sign in?
Actually, that's a good question. I asked her what time she wanted to come in, and she didn't say that I recall. And I actually should have pinned her down on that, but I know that she's a morning person. I think that she'll probably be here soon.
Okay. And I believe our quorum is a simple majority. Am I correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So let's call the meeting to order. We can get couple things. Maybe we'll at least get the minutes voted on and get that out of the way, and perhaps even our resolution before Liddy comes into the meeting. So Tracy, Paula, did you have a chance to review the minutes from last meeting?
Did,
No. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
I move them.
You
Oh,
move them?
okay.
Okay. I'll second them. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of passing our minutes from, or accepting our minutes from our last meeting?
Yes, from Paulette.
Okay, unanimous, great.
I can't see you, Paulette.
I know.
I can't see Anissa either. Where is everybody?
Tracy,
early.
my camera, I'm sorry, it sometimes it can't join with my Zoom, and I've been trying to problem solve it, and
Okay.
I have to do more thinking about it or something, and it's been on my to-do list, so I apologize.
That's okay.
And I'm finishing breakfast, and I'm sure you don't want to see that.
It depends what you're having.
I am kind of interested, yeah.
I'm having avocado toast and Cheerios.
Nice.
It's quite a
okay.
combination.
It really is.
All right, so looks like we have some time. Our other voting item is our, excuse me, the resolution we discussed at the August meeting for the Ithaca Farmers Market, revision of their 2019 CV. That was this, yeah, it was CV contract. We discussed it pretty much, and we did see the revised amendment via email. So I don't know if there's any questions regarding it. It looked pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anissa.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to butt in. I just wanted
No,
to
no.
say that the only change from the one that I sent out earlier was it included the date change from the summer to
Right.
the revised time.
Right.
I'm happy to move it. Paulette here.
Okay.
I'll second. Yep.
Okay.
So no further discussion?
Mm-mm.
All right. All in favor of accepting the revised amendment?
Aye.
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 All right, wonderful, thank you.
Okay, and in the meantime, Liddy contacted me to say that she's running a little late. So she'll be here as soon as she can.
Okay, great, thanks. Let me get back to find our agenda. Let's go into item C then, the discussion item on the extensions to 2019 and the CDBG CV
Sure.
contracts. Are you ready, Anissa?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
So as I think you probably all remember from the number of resolutions that you had to, oh no, you didn't have to, because Nels granted a number of 120-day extensions for the CV and 2019 projects. And this really had to do with, as you know, as we've been talking about, the projects got really backed up because of the pandemic. And normally any project can request an like administrative extension that NELS is enabled to give for 120 days. The CDBG CV contracts in particular were running up against their expiration dates because when we were creating these contracts, we had no idea how long the projects were going to take. And, you know, they were seen as very urgent. So we assumed that they were going to not take very much time. And they all have different they all had different deadline dates. So as it turns out, you know, a lot of, like, as you know, from the INHS ERAP program, it took a long time or longer than the program sponsor thought it was going to take. As you heard from OAR last week, they, you know, they're still doing the laundry services. They haven't spent down their money, et cetera. So they were, a number were granted 120 days extensions. And in the letter that they received, we said, please let us know by X date if you're going to need another extension, because that will need to go to the IURA board. And that means that I need to create a resolution for the board, et cetera. So really the only one that reached out saying that they needed an extension was Catholic Charities to their CDBG CV security deposits. And as you know, from reviewing the grant summary on a monthly basis, you know, it's been really hard for them to get those out the door because the eviction moratorium is in place. They discussed with me a number of ideas that they have to request of the board how they could modify their contracts, that, you know, because they still have 2019 funds to spend down, the CDBG-CB funds to spend down, 2020 security deposit funds, and they've just been awarded 2021. They expressed that they were very concerned. They didn't want to, you know, they wondered if IURA felt that they were not being good stewards of the program because they weren't able to spend down the money. I assured them that IURA is very aware that, you know, moving is not something that's happening right now. But regardless, so they have a number of different ideas how they would like to, sorry, Fernando's here, but oh no, there's another, I think he needs to come back in. They have a number of ideas, but they're still developing them. So I think that they'll be ready to, I asked them to submit a letter when they were ready. And so I think that by next month, they'll be able to come to you for that. But my point is that none of the other projects have submitted their extension letter. I've been reaching out to them and it seems like probably they do need an extension. They're not going to finish by October 28th or November 28th or the dates that they have to expire, but it seems like they need more time to figure out what it is they're asking for. So Nels and I discussed this because we're in kind of an unusual situation. We've never had this many that need extensions. What's the best way to do it? Nels suggested that probably what would be a good idea is if this committee would recommend to IURA that IURA grant a temporary 60-day extension to all projects that need it, and then look, you know, either we bring a giant blanket extension to them, which we have done before to you, saying like, seeing if it's feasible to have all these contracts have the same end date, because that makes it a lot easier administratively. We don't have to track like 7 different end dates. So that's what he suggested. I know you're wondering like, well, why isn't there a resolution? And I think the reason is because when this matter came to light that nobody was asking for extensions, but they actually needed one, we discussed it at our staff meeting on Wednesday how to proceed, and that's what Nels recommended. So to make a recommendation to IURA to do a temporary 30-day extension for all projects that need one.
30-day or 60-day?
Sorry, I'm sorry, 60, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So there's that. I did want to say, so that's the CDBG-CB ones. There's also a few 2019 projects that haven't finished up. Black Girl Alchemist, which I think that's just an administrative thing. I think they just need to get their final invoice in because that project I discussed with them over the summer and they were basically complete. And the Learning Web still has some housing scholarships funds. And the Learning Web is an organization that their ED has recently left, so they have an interim. So, and actually that's true of at least one other. Reach has, who's CDBG-CB, their finance person left. And that might also be why they didn't, these two organizations didn't request an extension. They, you know, in the changeover, they might not have realized that that's something that was necessary.
I think I'm okay with the 60-day extension, but I would hope that you, in contacting them, are saying that there's a danger of everything being out of compliance if they don't.
Yeah.
Because we'll run into our unspent ratio, et cetera. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, some of these projects may not really be moving forward. So things change.
Yes.
Sometimes. I mean, we've had other times that agencies weren't able to spend their money, and we need to know that.
Yes, so that is something that when we were granting the initial extensions, I did explain that to people, but I think people just don't really, I need to be, maybe I need to, revisit that with them, definitely, Tracy. I just
Okay.
want to let you know that the spend down requirement, remember HUD did lifted that for the 2019
Okay.
and so that's given a little breathing space. But yes, exactly, we don't want to be in this situation of when HUD comes back and is like, okay, we have the spending limit again, now we have all this money. And for your information, just so you know, Salvation Army is one of the groups that's really, they've spent nothing so far on the mortgage assistance. And I've checked in with her a variety of different times. And what she let me know is she thinks that INHS has one homeowner to refer to her right now. And she has worked with various banks. I wanted to know a little bit more about which banks, but and has not heard from any banks that they have city residents that have mortgage difficulties. I also referred her to the Tompkins County Office of the Aging, because as you probably know, they also refer, they have some rehab monies as well. So they hear from seniors who have rehab needs. They refer them to INHS, but wanted her to connect so that they know about this. But a lot of seniors have already paid their mortgage. So anyway, their issue is like INHS, they've had a lot more trouble getting that money implemented than they thought they would. And one option for them is they might, they haven't said that they want to, but of course they could return the money.
Yeah, this is all the pandemic money, right?
The Salvation Army is the pandemic money. Yeah.
Right. So if that comes back to us, is there a restriction about how we have to spend it?
Good question.
Sure.
It's the CDBG CV funds are more flexible than other CDBG funds that we see.
Okay.
But they need to be, the restriction is it has to be COVID related. So it has to be preventing it, related to some COVID related issue. And so that, and we also, I think that's it. I asked Nels, did he think that those funds would be expiring? And he said no. And I think it's really just about us putting in another amendment. They haven't, their HUD's very backed up right now too. Anyway, so that's the main restriction, that they need to be COVID related.
Okay, well, God willing, COVID might be ebbing, but does that make that we have to act faster?
Well, I think yes, and also I think acting faster is always a good idea. I think though that dealing with the aftermath of COVID is still a legitimate use of it.
All right. I mean, I'm just wondering if the Salvation Army is not in a position to connect with people who have mortgage issues.
I think that's, I think you're exactly right about that. I think they're trying to.
And, school taxes have just come out, which they're hefty. So let's all go, yeah. So I wonder, that relates to people staying in their homes too, the foreclosure issue. And it's not exactly their mortgage that they're paying anymore. Their mortgage may be done, but they're running into serious issues. You see people in tax foreclosures. So last year, a couple of houses I know went to Habitat for Humanity and INHS because of tax foreclosures. So that's another way that people aren't able to stay in their homes. And I don't know whether that's pandemic related or not.
Right. And that's a good question. I don't believe these funds can be used to pay taxes, but I can check.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It sounds also as if Salvation Army may need to do some outreach, some publicity around this program. This kind of reminds me of what we ran into with the, I keep wanting to say mini repair, but whatever the new name is, with INHS. They really have to
Yeah.
up their efforts to publicize to get the funds out.
Agree.
Or if it's too much for them, give the funds back and we'll figure something else out. Either way.
Mhm.
But it would be nice to get that straightened out.
Yes.
So we're
So it
talking
needs-
60 days? 60, is there any reason to shorten that to 30 days and perhaps have that option of an additional 30 days if they needed it?
Well, in talking to Nels, one of the issues is he's not sure, he hasn't said this for sure, but he's not sure that IRA board will have agenda items in November. So that is that, thank you, Liddy, for that, what Liddy put in the chat. So that is one of the issues, that just to make sure that none of these run out so to be in compliance, everybody needs to have an extension before their project ends. So for us as an agency to be compliant, that's why he recommended the 60 days, so that it covers everybody who's kind of like going to be rolling into that period of expiration, and gives IURA until December to extend if they don't meet in November. And I think the issue with the wanting to prompt them to finish up their project is really, it's because they haven't reached out to us. What we normally, and what I wrote in the letter when they received an extension, was please contact us by X date to let us know if you need the extension. And what we normally do is get a letter from them and then we take action. But upon discussion, I think it's really going to need to be the other way around. I reach out, then they write their letter. And no, so normally, though this wouldn't be the ideal process, and though I think we can note internally that whoever is in this boat has not been able to kind of like keep up with the compliance aspect of things, I think on our side, on the monitoring side and on the, everything, it behooves us to at least give the extension and then figure out what they need to do and either ask them to return the money or not, rather than just have everybody fall into this state of expiration. If that makes sense.
State of expiration sounds bad.
Yes.
Anissa, would you go over the timeline again? So the projects, the extension you said would be, if it's 60 days, would be for November and December? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's the 60 days would take effect whenever their contract expires. And that's part of the issue,
Okay.
is they all have different expiration dates. So
Okay.
some expire like at the end of October, some at the end of November. I think there's a sprinkling in there of probably a random other time. And so then the 60 days would cover them for when their contract expires until IURA takes up the issue. IURA might take up the issue before the 60 days expires and like give everybody their, appropriate extension for whatever their project needs.
Okay.
You see, we have a message from Liddy.
I saw that she will, yes, that she'll talk to Kathy, or yes, I did see that. So thank you, Liddy, again.
Yep.
And 211 is hearing from all kinds of people because they're sending people to all kinds of resources out there. So.
And Anissa, I'm sure staff has discussed this, but kind of what lessons learned from this, and perhaps changes in communication to the grantees about the importance of reporting, keeping their eyes on the dates that are relevant to their projects.
I think one of the main lessons learned here for me is like give everybody the exact same expiration date to their contract, because that allows us as staff, it's just a lot easier to monitor that way. It's like, oh, December 31st, 2021 is coming up. I need to contact everybody who had 2020 funds. That's normally how we do it. But like I said, these were all like, kind of piecemeal as they were coming through the CDBG-CB chain. So that, second of all, I think that, you know, it really hasn't, honestly, in previous year, it hasn't been that much of an issue. Usually there's one or two that need an extension, and this year, again, pandemic, lots of people have needed it, and because they've never really done it before, even though we tell them how to do it, they're just not really attending to that. That's one thing. So yes, having a bolder, like, hey, get in touch with us by X date if you need an extension, and probably an auto reminder would be good. I think one of the difficulties of getting into reminding people about all the aspects of their contract is that then they rely on the reminder more than they do, you know, their awareness of what their contract requires. So there's a little bit of a balance there. And then the last thing is that there have been changeovers in the leadership of some of these agencies during the time that they've had these contracts. And so I think those people are basically just scrambling, getting up to speed, understanding what they need to do in the first place. And so the fact that it was stated what they need to do, they just, you know, they're new and they need to get on board with that. So there's a lot of things we could do.
Okay.
Meanwhile, back to the 60 days. Are we supposed to vote on that, or?
Mel said he just needed a recommendation from you all, but yeah, I think if you voted on it, it would be helpful. Like voted on the recommendation that IURA give expiring contracts temporary 60-day extension while before, you know, in order to cover everybody who is maybe coming forward with a request.
Hold on a second. IURA reference. 60-day extension. All right, you have to say that again. So the committee recommends that the board grant 60-day extension to all
Expiring contracts.
And how
To
many are
enable-
there? How many are there that
1,
fall into this?
4, 5, 6. Yeah, at least 6. There was a couple who have their final vouchers in the pipeline. So other staff members thought they'd finish up by their expiration date.
Okay.
Okay, so the vote is the committee recommends that the excuse me, the IURA board grant a 60-day extension to all expiring COVID funded related projects, approximately 6 or so.
Just to clarify, there's also some 2019 projects that are going to be expiring. So COVID and 2019.
Okay. And how many are there in 2019? Did you count those two?
Yeah, that was Learning Web. That was included in the 6, but Learning Web is the main one that's of concern. And Catholic Charities,
Okay.
security deposits, which I said they will be coming forward with a request on what they, you know,
Okay.
an idea of how to use those.
Okay. I just wanted to look up the Learning Web one again.
And the wording is contracts, not projects, right?
Correct. Thank you.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, thank you.
And I so move.
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Questions?
Mm-mm.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, wonderful. All right.
Just an
Thanks.
update. I did, Fernando did come into the waiting room, but then he dropped out of the waiting room. And I don't know if that's because something I did or he did, but I did email him and ask him to come back. So I'm monitoring the waiting room.
Okay. All right, so if there's nothing further on this particular topic, I think we can officially welcome Liddy and start that discussion.
Good morning, how's
Good
everyone?
morning.
Um,
Welcome
So-
back.
Thank you, thank you. I hear you want to talk about HMIS. Am I right? Is it data, homeless response system data? Okay.
Yeah.
So HMIS stands for Homeless Management Information Systems. It's a HUD requirement that any agency that's getting even like sort of $1 of HUD funding and is serving people experiencing homelessness is entering data into our HMIS, required in every community in the United States. We have sort of a checkered history of HMIS data in our community. But for the past 2 years, we migrated to a new system 2 years ago, and it has greatly improved our ability to do data entry, but also sort of like analyze and keep better track of our data. Prior to the past 2 years, we had what was called a closed system. So nobody could really see a person's like full path through the homeless response system. And now we have what's called an open data sharing system, which means that providers who are on our release of information can all see everything as far as other entries in by other providers. So we can get a much clearer picture of people's history. HUD also started requiring some longitudinal reports in the past few years. So there's a couple of years of what's called LSA data, longitudinal service analysis data. I shared some of those reports with Anissa, and I can share them with you. I never know like how in the weeds people want to go. So I guess I'm curious. Yeah.
I'll find those, Lydia, and send that. Lydia sent
Okay.
these a little while back, so
They're easier to look at sort of on your own time or not on your own time, but like they take a little like sitting with. They're data visualizations that have to do with, there's a whole lot of different ways you can kind of like slice and dice our data. And so you can look at people's pathways through the system. You can look at their length of time homeless. You can look at what their exit, where people are exiting to, what their returns to homelessness look like. It's a pretty robust set of data that we collect locally and submit to HUD yearly. In terms of the HMIS itself, we're collecting sort of like all the data points you would think a data collection system would be collecting. So all people's demographic information, information about their income, their benefits, sort of like where they're at, everything about them. And then we do as live as we can data entry. So when people's stuff changes, we try to update it in there in the HMIS. Yeah, Anissa has this is what we call Stella. It's a visualization of that longitudinal service reports.
So do you, just a quick question for Lydia, do you want me to, I know it's hard to see on the screen.
People can have them if they want them.
Okay, I'll send it out.
Yeah.
But I just thought the committee members might be interested to look at this. It's very.
It's pretty
This is
interesting.
excuse me, this is the longitudinal part?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So you're seeing right here, you're looking at 2018, 2019, and 2020
Okay.
side by side. And in some of the visualizations, they're comparing how we did year to year. There are, so the reason I sort of started off by saying we had a checkered HMIS past is really before data before 2019 is could be imperfect because of sort of our community's culture around data collection and stuff. We've made some huge advances in the way that we are collecting and storing data in our community. So some of those 2018 numbers that you're going to see, or anything before 2019, there are some errors. Like I know in one of these reports, it says there's a child-only household that was in the system for like a year. And that's an error, right? So those are some kids who like didn't get connected to their parent in the system, and then the parent exited and the kids sort of lingered in there.
So can I ask, what's with the 91 days? Is that some break?
That's about right. 91
Okay.
days. That's our average length of time homeless. And that is
Mhm.
pretty accurate, no matter what way you measure it. And that's long. It's longer than we would want it to be.
So after the 90, so that's the average.
Mhm.
What do you consider good? I mean, why are people not getting housed sooner?
Sure, I would be happy to have that conversation. We have a profound lack of suitable, affordable housing for folks
Mhm.
is the real reason. There's really like not another reason. It really is sort of that reason. And so it's an average, right? There are outliers. There's folks who enter shelter, are in shelter for 3 or 4 days, return to permanent housing and never come back, right? And then there's another population. We have, I think, 3 people right now in our community who have been in the emergency shelter for 365 days.
Wow.
And those people have really sort of profound service needs and need a lot of support and whatever. And then the sort of most common scenario we see, and certainly something that's playing out right now in our community, is that even when people have a funding mechanism to pay for housing, they still are unable to locate that housing. There just aren't landlords willing to rent to people. There's the housing stock itself is not great in the price range that people can search in. Even up to fair market rent, I would say that our rental housing stock is pretty poor. And so people get kind of like stuck in the shelter at bottlenecks at shelter. During the warmer months, shelter, you have to be approved for shelter and you have to stay, there are some compliance requirements for you to be in shelter. Those are compliance requirements that Tompkins County Department of Social Services has as part of their programming. And then in the between October 15th and April 15th, we enter into what's called cold weather policy. It's a New York State mandate that says anytime it's below 32 degrees or colder, including wind chill, a person has a right to shelter. So there's no, the compliance pieces go away for folks, and there's also no barriers to entry. So you can just, yeah.
What are the compliance requirements?
So you'd want to talk to Tompkins County DSS if you want to know like the super duper details about compliance, but the sort of basics are that folks are required to be involved in substance abuse treatment if that is an issue that they have. So one of the first things for that's for emergency assistance or for temporary housing assistance. So at sort of eligibility, folks who are like believed to or known to or self-report as having a substance use disorder are screened by an on-site CASAC, which is a chemical addiction substance abuse counselor, and given sort of like a determination by that person, which says either like, we think you need to be in treatment, we think you need to be in inpatient treatment, we think you need to be in outpatient treatment, or like, you don't have a substance use disorder. So they have to comply with whatever that person says. So if the person says you need to be in treatment, they need to get into treatment within a certain period of time. There's also, well, right now, because of COVID, I'm actually not sure where all of these currently are, but normally there's employment requirements for ongoing assistance. So you need to be looking for work, working, compliance factors behind substance use. Yes, that's employment.
You're answering the question.
Yeah. So you need to be working, looking for work, or training for work. And the other one for people who are receiving housing assistance is that you need to be engaging in housing search, which sounds like a pretty easy and innocent compliance requirement, except that when there's no housing, you sort of are like, yep, I called Norfie Piro again, and he doesn't have any housing here. But eventually people stop looking for housing because it's very frustrating. So then they fall out of that compliance during the year. During cold weather policy, that stuff is all moot. The state pays, the state, picks up the bill for people who enter shelter under the cold weather policy. And so our numbers tend to rise in the winter for, obviously it's cold, you want to come inside, but also there is a reduction in those compliance requirements during the winter. And then what happens is sometimes people come in during the winter and never leave or have a hard time getting out because they don't want to return to unsheltered homelessness, or wherever they were staying before is no longer an option and they're looking for housing. We just really have a real bottleneck with permanent housing, I would say.
Can I ask also, in all this tracking, do you track whether people have, you said substance abuse issues, do you also track mental health issues?
Oh, yeah. All of everything.
Okay.
But
And
it's all for HMIS and HUD for our reporting, it's all self-report. So we ask the participant if they have a substance use disorder or mental health issue, but we don't require verification at a systems level. Some programs do, so we will have it in our system, but if somebody does an intake and you're asking them, do you have a mental health problem? And they say, nope, we check no. We don't diagnose. We're not, in that position. So that's just a little caveat to that. But yes, we track, we call them special population statuses. We also track veteran status, domestic violence history, all that, everything, all the things that you would want us to track, I think we're probably tracking. We as a community are growing, as I said, with our data, and are sort of heading towards a more data-driven planning process for our community. As part of that, I think you guys are aware that we have engaged a consultant, Lisa Horn, who is going to be sort of doing like a really deep dive into our data, both our HMIS data and our coordinated entry data, and then hopefully some DSS data as well, to really try to come up with some strong recommendations. Those of us who work in the field sort of like have a hunch what some of those recommendations might be, but I'm really excited to see what that data is going to tell us to do.
Okay, so now I'm just going to ask you, if you were going to make up those recommendations right now, do you feel like talking about them?
Sure. I mean, what I would say, I mean, people experiencing homelessness are not a homogeneous population. So there does need to be sort of a spectrum of responses. But if I could only choose one response, it would be to create low barrier permanent housing that people can live in.
What does that mean?
Low barrier.
Yeah.
It means that there are as low as possible like threshold for folks to be able to enter housing. So the continuum of care and HUD believe in a philosophy called housing first, which means, housing is a human right. Get people into housing with no preconditions. No, you don't have to have, it's not based on merit. It's not based on your ability to complete a program. You get into housing, permanent housing first, and then we can, surround you with supports that help you stabilize in the long term. So a low barrier project would have a strong housing first philosophy, be able to welcome people into housing like right from the street, who may still have some of those substance use or mental health issues that are untreated, and then offer programming without requiring it, right? It's hard to say because there are some things happening, right? Like some of this development that we've been looking at and talking about for years is coming to fruition. So Art House is leasing up. West End Heights is right behind it. Those are two pretty large scale affordable housing projects, both of which have set aside units for special populations. So things are happening, but I would say that we need somewhere between 50 and 100 units of permanent housing with a low threshold.
Does second one cottages fit that definition, Liddy?
Almost.
I don't
Almost.
think they do.
They don't. I mean, they have some preconditions. They are very, they walk with you, right? That's their sort of ideology. But they do have some, it's not a traditional landlord-tenant relationship, and it's also not a traditional programmatic relationship. It's close. One of the models that I see other communities using that does work is basically like agency owned or operated permanent housing projects. So instead of having a private market landlord and being in necessary, and I mean, they could be scattered site, but instead of having a private landlord, your landlord is Salvation Army or whatever, because agencies are better equipped and have more patience and might accept some of the risk of housing first in a way that private landlords, especially in our market, they don't have to help, so they aren't, is the truth. But there are some other interventions too that would be useful, but really we need housing.
In our last round of grant requests, there was a request from, I guess it was St. John's. They were talking about buying a hotel.
Yep.
Is that what you're in favor of? That kind of thing?
So that's part of what the plan that Lisa is working on seeks to answer that question. I'm sort of hesitant to say one way or another. This is what I will say. The continuum of care will always, if we're given a choice between emergency shelter or permanent housing, we will always choose permanent housing for folks. Emergency shelter is something that a continuum needs, but I am not totally convinced that we need a bigger emergency shelter. What I would argue is that we need more places for people to go when they exit emergency shelter. So
I thought that, wait, excuse me, I thought that idea was that there was going to be permanent housing there.
Yes.
It was sort of part and part.
Yes. So if that is the way that if that plan was achievable and feasible and realistic, I think it would be an interesting intervention. It's unusual to mix populations, but Ithaca does all kinds of stuff that's slightly different. But I haven't seen a ton of models that are in one structure, both emergency shelter and permanent housing, although we already do have that on a smaller scale in our community, because at St. John's on the third floor are single room occupancies.
Yeah.
I don't like single room occupancies. HUD doesn't like single room occupancies because people should have, a door that locks and 4 walls and a kitchen and a bathroom of their own, really. I know why they sort of gained popularity in, really, it was like the 70s and 80s. It was an inexpensive way to get a whole bunch of people into housing, but it's not really like a viable permanent housing option for folks. So whenever I am talking about permanent units, I'm sort of talking about at studios at minimum, or mini units, sort of TC Action style, so that their units are small but self-contained, have a kitchen and a bathroom in the walls.
So would Chartwell House or Magnolia House qualify as SRO to you right now?
Chartwell House is an SRO. Magnolia House is not. They're both permanent supportive housing. So they're in
Magnolia not. What is the difference?
Chartwell House is basically they have shared kitchen and bath
Yeah,
for everyone. Nobody has so so a single room occupancy by definition is, in my understanding, is a room. It's like a boarding house, I guess
Sure.
is the best.
Yeah.
So that is the way Chartwell is set up. They purchased Chartwell in that condition. But Magnolia is, Magnolia has a community kitchen, but everyone has their own kitchen.
they have separate kitchens in there. I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
they have a tiny, so they have burners and fridge, but no oven.
Okay,
And then they have a community kitchen. Amici is the same way, Amici House.
okay.
But it's just more, it's a person's own space.
So they have a stove burner
They
and
have
a
two
refrigerator,
burners and a fridge. Yeah.
but it's
and
like,
cupboards.
it's not like a hot plate. It's like a real stove.
It's a stove, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Amici has that. And then I would say that the Piro, the one that I know on the corner of State and Plain is definitely
That's an
SRO.
SRO. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an SRO.
Flat
And-
out SRO.
Yeah, and that's not, I mean,
I know,
that's not ideal.
I know. Okay, so
safety.
so that's interesting. I didn't know that Magnolia and Amici were both that way.
Yeah, and then
I thought Amici was real apartments.
they're mini unit. They call them micro units.
Okay,
And they do have the biggest unit in either of those places is suitable for what they call 3 heartbeats. So, one adult, 2 children, 2 adults, 1 child. And that's the biggest unit that they have in those places. And then Corn Street, which is another permanent supportive housing project, are full-size apartments.
yes.
Our art house and what is it called? The West
West
End.
End, yeah.
Are those regular studios apartments?
Completely normal apartment,
Okay.
indistinguishable from a private market renter.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How full are those? Leasing.
So I do. So our house is 80 units on the affordable housing side, which is just like the regular,
Mhm.
so-called regular people.
Yeah.
And I think they're basically fully leased up, although
I
not
think Renee
everybody.
said 60 units are
Yeah.
leased right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
And they're 2-year leases.
yeah, which is wild.
Yeah.
Well,
And then
that's, yeah, that's weird. Okay, fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. As a tenant, I'd be a little nervous about that, but whatever.
Yeah,
And then the 40 supported units are leasing up now, but they're not completely leased up, really. Right, Lydia?
right. And those come through coordinated entry.
So wait a minute, the 40 in the west side,
That's our house. 40,
Oh,
our
that's-
house is 40 units that are funded by Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative and run by Tompkins Community Action. 40 set asides for youth experiencing homelessness.
okay, so those are not filled yet. But then you said the 60 others are, 40 of those. Well, now I'm lost. I just
60,
got-
okay. So here's what I remember from the COC meeting that I was at the other day,
Okay.
that there's about 120 units in Art House total. 40 of those units are called ESHI, which is what Liddy is
Yeah.
the Empire State. Okay, so set aside for youth exiting homelessness.
Okay,
And TC Action is the service provider there. And
Okay.
they are in the process of identifying and leasing those up. But I don't
Mhm.
recall that they gave us a number for how many were set to
They didn't, but I think it's 25.
so 25 are currently selected, people living in those, and they're continuing to interview and help people move in.
Okay.
I think they come partially or with some furnishings, and they also have to get those in place. I think that's part of what's going on the
Okay.
supported housing side. And then on the affordable housing side, there are 80 units. So that's a tax credit project.
Mhm.
And 60 of those 80 units have been filled, and they're continuing to interview people for the other 20.
Okay,
And that's where that is.
and then what's happening with the west side? Anybody know about that?
Sure. West End Heights, Lakeview project.
Yeah,
It is also a similar model where there's an affordable housing side and and some set asides. They have 22 units, 22 one bedrooms in the affordable housing part of their project. Um, and the lottery for those units closes, I think, November 1st.
okay.
And then they have 18 units that are funded with eShy, same funding stream as Art House. Those set asides are for 6 people who have primary substance use disorder and are experiencing homelessness, 10 people who are experiencing homelessness with serious mental illness, and 2 people experiencing homelessness with HIV/AIDS. And then the rest of their units, and I think it's 60 something more, they're moving their scattered site
Mhm.
people who were living in the Lakeview scattered site spot plate project into Art House. So they're all sort of internal, there's an internal shifting around of where people are living. So the eShy units also are using coordinated entry, which is a process that we run at HSC to try to fill those 18 units, but they have some higher thresholds than traditional permanent supportive housing. So it's slow, but I anticipate being able to find 18 people to go into those units.
Okay, Amici House is basically the same as Art House for special pop.
Yep, Amici House is youth experiencing homelessness
Yeah.
with a chronic homeless preference.
Okay, and how is that doing? Are they full?
Full.
Okay,
I mean, there might be 1 or 2 turnovers, but it's doing great. Yeah. They use coordinated entry. I can send Anissa or reply all to a message with everyone. I created a just sort of like pretty brief chart of our supportive housing inventory in Ithaca,
Yeah.
if people are interested to see it. So it has the
Yeah.
eligibility and how people are referred on that chart. I can send it out for you guys. It is interesting to know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Liddy, going back to the HMIS system,
Yeah,
what agencies have access to that? How's it
sure.
kind of and who maintains it?
Yeah, those are both good questions. So we are a part of an HMIS collaborative, which basically means we share a batch of licenses.
I'm sorry, when you say we, you're talking about COC or?
New York 510, New York 510, yeah,
Okay.
COC, which is also, it's easy for us because that just really means Tompkins County.
Wait, COC is what?
We're called New York 510. We're the county. A lot of COCs are multi-county or regional, but our COC is just Tompkins County. So
Can I jump in here for just a second and just say that a COC is a continuum of care.
Oh, okay.
And-
Got that.
Okay.
And that
sorry,
is a
I'm
full
sorry.
spectrum of providers that are involved in homeless services, all types of providers, right, Liddy? From, we provide case management to we provide shelter to we provide permanent, like all along that continuum
yes.
about homelessness.
Okay, got it.
That's the
Thanks.
continuum. Yep. So we, Tompkins County, are in a HMIS collaborative with Syracuse, with New York 505, which is Syracuse, Oswego, and Cayuga counties, which really just means we buy licenses with them and they provide sort of the highest level of oversight over the database. But HSC is the Human Services Coalition is the lead agency for the database, and I'm the local administrator of that database. As far as participating agencies in HMIS, it is Tompkins County DSS, emergency shelters provider, Tompkins Community Action, the Learning Web, and I must be forgetting someone. Lakeview. health services, and Catholic Charities and OAR. Yeah, those are the people who are doing data entry into HMIS. Once a year, we collect data from everybody. So that's for the point in time and housing inventory count. And when we do that, that would include providers like Second Wind who don't participate in HMIS. And then some of the other, like we call them other permanent housing providers.
Mhm.
Coordinated entry is a part of HMIS. So coordinated or isn't integrated with our HMIS. So there are some people who submit referrals for coordinated entry that are not actually users of our database. And that would be places like the Village of Ithaca, Salvation Army. Some of the street outreach folks are able to do coordinated entry, but they aren't actually adding data into our system.
Mhm.
It's a lot. I know it's a lot, and it gets very like I can sprawl. So you know, I get that it's a lot.
Carl, do you mind if I ask a couple questions?
No, go ahead, Anissa.
So one question, Liddy, is I have two questions on my mind. One has to do with SROs and one has to do with something you said at the beginning, which is a lot of people have a funding mechanism. So just to clarify on SROs. So SROs are what is currently considered like a quote unquote old style way of housing people. It's basically a bedroom. Am I correct?
That's right.
So there's a bathroom usually down the hall and a kitchen maybe down the hall.
It's like shared housing. Yeah.
But what I'm confused about with SROs, and hopefully you can clarify, the single room occupancy part, I always thought that the SRO unit, the room itself was for one person or a couple.
Yeah.
But am I correct that the shelter, the Friendship Center does, that there are more than, okay, can you clarify that to the group, please?
Sure. So an SRO is for a single or a couple, and it's really shouldn't, this is part of the reason the SROs are like out of favor. It should be people who are choosing to live together. If there's more than one person in that room, it should be a person that you are choosing to live with, a loved one, a child, a family member. But because of our lack of housing, I guess I don't need to say why, in our single room occupancy project at the shelter, there are two people living in one room who did not choose each other as roommates. So that's like a half of a room occupancy and really super not a suitable permanent housing option for folks.
So when you describe it like that too, which it is clarifying to me, because when you describe it like that too, the whole idea of people are not choosing each other.
Right.
Because even like roommates choose each other. So this isn't that situation.
No.
So this is more like, I mean, not to be put too fine a point on it, but that sounds to me more like incarceration, where you are placed with somebody that you don't know.
Yeah.
In a very small space.
Correct.
I've never thought of it that way. I just realized that if people don't have choice over who's there, it's not like you're in a big dorm room where possibly, you know, everybody's kind of on equal footing or whatever.
Right.
I'm not trying to say that that's perfect either, but anyway, so that, and then my other question was, I believe that you had said at the beginning, and I think it would be helpful to dig in a little bit by what you meant. Did you say something like in the coordinated entry system right now, most people, or did you give figures about, you said that people have funding mechanisms, but what is a funding mechanism? What do you mean by that? And how many people have them? And what does all that really mean?
All right. So I'll do this quick because I don't know how long your meeting is. So we maintain coordinated entry at HSC. Coordinated entry is a system, HUD requires it. We do a pretty good job of it in Tompkins County, where it creates a single waiting list for any supportive housing units that are funded through HUD funding and others, because we have people who participate without it. So People who are on that list are prioritized by their vulnerability. They take an assessment that assesses their vulnerability. We call it the VI SPADAT, whatever. They get a score for their vulnerability. When projects have openings, we refer people. When I say we, I do mean HSC. We run coordinated entry. We refer people based on their vulnerability index, that score, as opposed to any other reason to that available housing. So length of time on the list doesn't really matter. Whatever, we prioritize based on vulnerability and eligibility for specific projects. So like if it's a project that only takes women, we're not going to send a male referral. But right now, we have in coordinated entry about 120 people, and 94 of them have viable referrals, which means they're matched to either a physical unit somewhere in one of those permanent supportive housing projects that we just sort of ran through, or they have enrolled in or are considered eligible, gone through some amount of eligibility for a voucher program. There's a few of them right now, voucher programs, or they've been referred to as one of those eSHI units. And so the people who are moving into existing units are just waiting until those units are like really available. Those people are doing great. There's like 64 people who are eligible for vouchers right now, who have a voucher right now. But most of them are still homeless, I guess, is what I'll say, because of that lack of available housing. But it is, it's like a moment, it's unheard of. It has never happened in our community before that everybody in coordinated entry had somewhere to go, had a way to pay for something. Is more clarifying for that. So it is like, I am excited. It's a goal of mine is to have everybody in coordinated entry like matched to their housing, but now we do have a struggle with getting people housed. Does that make sense?
So-
It got very confusing.
Go ahead, Tracy, I'm sorry.
Can I ask, so you said there are 120 people currently homeless that
Currently in coordinated entry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then 94 have viable referrals.
Yep.
Okay, so that leaves, I don't know, do the math. Okay, so the others don't have anything.
Not yet, but they will. I mean,
Okay, but
so-
you
and-
feel like there's enough to go around with this right now?
right
that what you're saying?
now, right now, there is money to support people's housing for a minimum of 1 year. Some people are getting into programs that are permanent and ongoing. Some people are getting into basically like a rapid rehousing program with a 12-month timeline. The people who are not matched to something
Mhm.
are going to be the lowest on that vulnerability index. So people in a certain part of the vulnerability index are generally often able to self-resolve. They figure it out and like move in with family, or they find something, or they get a different job. So it's not all of our hardest to serve and longest time chronic homeless population is currently funded to be able to afford housing and looking for housing.
Okay.
Um,
So does that mean people who are camping behind?
Sure,
The
most
store-
people, so coordinated entry is a voluntary process. That's something to know about it. Everything HUD, COC, continuum of care stuff, consumer choice is integral to it. We are not forcing anyone to do anything.
Mhm.
We're just not. So if people, all the street outreach people know about coordinated entry. Anytime they go into the encampment spaces, they say basically, are you interested? Would you ever in a million years move into housing? Basically. And if somebody says yes, they get them on that list.
Okay.
So right now I know the encampment population is probably about 75% vouchered, has a funding source. But they don't but that does not mean they have located housing.
Okay, can I jump in and just try to ask some clarifying questions too, Liddy? Okay, so, okay, this is based on what I just heard from you. So first of all, you said 94 people have viable referrals, which is amazing. That's an incredibly high percentage, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Very high for our community. It's the highest it's
Yeah.
ever been. Yeah.
I think it's very high for really any community. I think all communities do struggle with,
Yeah.
you know, having enough units, but okay. So, but of that, so some of those people are referred to actual units that exist within supportive housing
Right.
developments. And so it's like that unit's being cleaned out or whatever,
Yeah.
they're just ready to move in. So
Yeah.
it seems to me that it's like what do you call it? A mixed bag.
Yeah.
That 64
is.
people have vouchers, because the voucher ostensibly is money in the pocket, but even before we were at this particular time in life where there's all these other, part of the reason that I perceive that so many people at this time have what you call a funding mechanism or a voucher in their pocket is because HUD has released a lot of these to the
Yes.
community because of the
Accurate.
pandemic and all that. But predating that, no matter what kind of voucher that's out there, people who have vouchers as the way that they're going to pay for their housing have really had a hard time finding a place to use them in the city and in general, because even though these vouchers are guaranteed rent, landlords have a lot of feelings about them or know that they're attached maybe to somebody who's, in this case, experienced homelessness or whatever, and landlords do not have to rent to people that have vouchers. And so this is a pre-existing problem that people who have actual vouchers often cannot find a place to use them.
Can I
Yes.
ask another question just with that though? So with the art house and with the West End opening, vouchers will be allowed there.
Yeah.
And then we also have a lot of housing that's going to be opening on the Commons with Vicino, and vouchers will be allowed there, correct? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we've got
it's a work
those.
in progress. Yeah, we do have
Right.
stuff on the horizon for
And
sure.
then the other thing I think there's still spaces in is the Vism development that's in the 300 block of West Seneca, because I go by there and it still says signs on the building say
Yeah.
they're available.
Yeah.
So-
Yep. That's 4 units. That,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean,
Are any of them rented?
I don't know if any of them are rented. They are slightly above the section 8. So vouchers have payment standards.
Mhm.
They're all different and I won't get you in the weeds about them, but the basic payment standard for a regular section 8 or housing choice voucher in Tompkins County, it pays 90% of fair market rent. So affordable housing units are still sometimes above fair market rent and certainly above 90% of fair market rent, right?
Mhm.
If fair market rent is $1,000, section 8 will pay 900.
Okay.
And private landlords, those are still private landlords, the affordable housing projects, they still have screening. There's a lot of ways, there's a lot of barriers to housing, even in tax credit properties or affordable housing properties. So landlords or property managers are still, people are still applying for those units. The first barrier that we see for people, and this is something that we're really like witnessing right now in this sort of like frenzy of getting people signed up for voucher programs, is like most people do not have a photo ID, right? So most people in this population. So even if we get them the voucher, we got the voucher, then the landlord needs the photo ID too, and then you're just sort of like, it's just one of those things. It's private market landlords. We do not have enough housing for everyone. And we don't have it on the horizon either, I guess is what I'll say. But we are improving. We're in a better place than we were with affordable housing 3 years ago, and we'll be in a better place in 3 years. But right now, we're nowhere near where we need to be as far as affordable units, especially when you include the non-homeless population to the market of people searching for units, which they are, trust me. And so they're much more desirable. They're in the 30 to 60 AMI range instead of that 0 to 30 range. Landlords are looking at 2 applicants, and one is a self-pay and one is a voucher pay. Cash is king still here in capitalism. So I think we're like, I think it would be premature to say that we have built our way out of our housing crisis yet.
Anissa, you had other questions?
No, I think Liddy covered
Okay.
them. I think part of what you just said was one of my questions that people, sorry, I need to learn how to unraise my hand, but that in addition to people who are homeless trying to get into units, that there's still people who are not homeless who are applying for these units that have just been built.
Yes, absolutely. Also, the eviction moratorium, I'm just going to say this because I know we're probably out of time. I could talk about housing all day, but I won't. The eviction moratorium has been a great life-saving public health measure. And it has stopped the market in its tracks. People are not moving. People are not, units are not changing over in the way that they traditionally have. So I think that's in a way a good thing, but it means that there are some of the what we call like naturally occurring affordable housing, which really just means like run down and old. So the naturally occurring housing isn't turning over the way that it traditionally has, because people were getting evicted from those units, and then the next family of people holding a voucher or whatever was moving into that naturally occurring affordable housing. And that isn't happening right now, which is probably a good thing, but it is a pressure in our market right now.
Liddy, if someone's on the coordinate was in the coordinated entry system and is eligible for a voucher, and say they find housing with a family member or friend, does that qualify for payment or no? It has to be with under a lease.
Yeah, and in fact, a single room occupancy, which we've discussed at length today, doesn't qualify for payment from a voucher either, because HUD doesn't like them, basically. Because it's not considered a suitable, viable permanent housing. There's a way to get a waiver for to rent from a family member, but you can't. Everybody in a household needs to be on the same voucher together. So unless you put your family or friend on your voucher to rent the unit, you can't do roommates with vouchers.
Okay. Do we have other questions for Liddy?
No, this has been really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
definitely has. Yeah.
I just before I go, I'm gonna we've updated our housing initiatives information on our website, and it includes a little bit like deeper dive into some of the like system-y stuff. So I'm just gonna stick it in the chat for you.
Great.
If you get interested in coordinated entry or whatever.
I sent all of you the data visualization charts that Liddy that we saw at the beginning, and I'm sorry I didn't realize that I could give those to you.
Yeah, it's fine. They're right.
But I also CC'd Liddy in case you have questions or want her to come back in the future. You can tell me, and or maybe Liddy could, if you just have like 1 or 2 questions, Liddy might be willing to just talk to you about that.
Accurate.
Right.
Have a good day, guys. I'm going to jump off. Thank you for having
you.
me and asking good
Thanks.
questions and stuff. All right.
Thank you very much, Liddy. Always
Bye-bye.
appreciate hearing from you.
You too. Bye.
Okay.
Now I know how to spell continuum.
Hi, Fernando. Oops.
Sorry I'm late. It's Friday, lost track of everything.
That happens.
That happens.
All right, so I think we're pretty much through our agenda. We have the review of the grant summary. Excuse me.
So as I mentioned, Salvation Army, we're flagging as one that we're concerned haven't spent anything down. And Fernando, just so you know, a lot of the CDBG CV projects, as well as 2019 Catholic Charity Security Deposits and BG Black Girl Alchemists are coming up on their expiration deadlines, and Learning Lab. Black Girl Alchemists, we believe, just needs to submit their voucher. Catholic Charities will be coming forward with a proposal, what they want to, you know, whether they want an extension or what they want to do. And I need to reach out to Learning Web because they have a new interim executive director that might not be aware that they need to ask for an extension. So those are the ones that are, that as a staff we've mentioned are the most like pressing for us to follow up with. And Salvation Army, as we mentioned, needs to, they need to spend some down or figure out why they can't and ask for help or do outreach or return the money.
You know, Anissa, I had a question about Founders Way. So,
Yeah.
you know, they got some funding for 2019 and
Yeah.
I think it's at zero or a small, I think it's a zero for the home funds.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if that, no, obviously, well, we'll say obviously, but I anticipate that the funds will be spent, right? The work is going
Yeah.
pretty fast. But I'm wondering if that says anything about the timing. So it seems like they could have gotten the funds in 2020 versus 2019. Is it, and I apologize, I don't remember from the presentation, but do they make the request, was the request made early to leverage other funding, or were there delays in the project that's accounting for no draws on the 2019 funding? Just wondering, are they applying too early?
Okay, yeah, let me try to answer that. So Founders Way was funded in 2019 and 2020.
Right.
So I think the 2019 was, yes, to try to leverage, show support. 2020 is to like further support the project, right? Because it's a very expensive project. So I think that's probably why you saw those two different years. And I think they applied for slightly different reasons in both years, even though both were to like ultimately get, without sounding crass, money into the project. Part of the reason that they haven't vouchered, I think, for the 2019 is we need to do a subsidy layering and underwriting analysis. That's something that Nels usually does, and I'm going to be helping him with that so I can learn and do that. But we need that, and that's something HUD requires. The contract has been executed, but we need some information from them to be able to do that subsidy layering. And I think that it's just like a puzzle piece is how I see it. It's like I need to reach out to Leslie Ackerman and make sure that she knows that we're still waiting for that, which I do think she knows. But so we need information from that in order to do the subsidy layering, which would then enable them to voucher for that project. So I'm not sure why we don't have that information yet. And I can report back on that next meeting. But my understanding is that is why the 2019 Founders Way they haven't vouchered for that yet. And I think in terms of these very, very big projects, I mean, I don't need to tell you, it's a ton of money for us, but it's not a lot of money, in that, in the world of that project. So I just think it's, one of the many requirements to get over is that subsidy layering, and that we need access to their financial data about that. Like, who are their other, funders? What's the loan, whatever, interest rate, all of that stuff. So, but it's a good question, and I can refer the question also to Nels, because I'm sure he'll have a much more in-depth answer for you than what I just gave, and email you all about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's really necessary. I was just, it raised a thought.
Yeah. I think
you
it
know,
is tricky. You're right. It's like, well, it's like did they apply too soon? I think that's a good question to keep in mind for future when large developments are applying for this money, is asking them like, why do you need it now? Because sometimes they don't get the tax credit thing right away. Like, I think it is a very just tricky process. And it's like, is our money being tied up for something that can't be used right away? I think it's a good question to explore in terms of if there's another way it could be done.
I think we have
More,
done it in the past too. Mhm.
more often than not, there are delays. That's sort of the norm.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
and maybe you make the money available with some sort of caveat that, if it doesn't get used by a certain time, and reverts
and
or something. I mean,
HUD home funds do have like they do need to be committed and used within a certain amount of time. So there is that, but it's like obviously more lengthy than what we're seeing here. Like, obviously we're still in compliance, but yeah, maybe we want to set a higher bar kind of.
Yeah.
All right, great, thanks. Any other questions regarding the grant reports? We're certainly under the spin down ratio, so no problem there. Okay, no further questions. Any staff report? Anything else you want to bring
Yes,
to our attention?
I do, and I'll keep it quick. So you already know, as Liddy said, Lisa Horn is a consultant who's been engaged to do the COC needs assessment that IURA will be contributing $10,000 to. Tracy, I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but I know that it was particularly, an item of interest for you that it be a local person, and she is local.
Great.
And she has worked with Park in the past. She did a few years ago a Tompkins County child nutrition assessment to understand how many kids were food insecure. I'm not sure if you're all aware that Joanne Cornish will be retiring from the department at the end of October.
oh boy,
Well,
Yeah.
there you
Wow.
go.
wow.
Okay. So
When is she retiring? Say that again. When?
And end of October. So I think
Oh.
29th is the last working day of October.
So
Okay.
replacement been chosen?
No, and when we inquired about that, what Lisa Nicholas said is that it sounds like it's going to be probably a lengthy process. Lisa will be the interim director.
Okay.
But I don't know what all the HR, this seems like the type of thing that there could be, a big search for or whatever. I'm not sure I don't know that the process is clear what's going to happen next. I think that HR handles that. And it has been posted, I believe.
Okay.
So I don't know where they are with that. I'm not sure if you're aware that Lee Dillon from Tompkins Community Action has retired. That was, I actually wasn't aware of that until the other day. So that has happened. And Danielle Harrington is the interim executive director there. And you know that Danielle's been the deputy director and involved in TCA for many, many, many years. So thought you might be interested to know that Renee Funk is a regional, I forget what her actual title is, like regional property manager for Cornerstone Property Management, which is managing Art House. So she's at the regional level, but she's helping with lease up at Art House. And Tammy Baker has left her position as community outreach worker to become the on-site manager at Art House. I'm not sure if we've talked about that already.
Wow.
So, and in the COC meeting recently, Renee was there to present. And they have in addition to what we already told you when Lydia was here, they have an October 15th lease up target date, not including the eShy units that TCA is handling. So, those 60 have only been leased up so far. I believe their goal is to have them all leased up by the 15th. So that's just a few days.
And
Also, just
Renee
as a
Funk was a former agency
IURA.
employee. Yeah.
Yeah. And before that, she worked at Catholic Charities. She's
Yep.
also worked at NHS. Also, she reported that, you know, the Cherry Street Arts Collective has a gallery with an art house that is beautiful, and also a working studio and community. You know, there's community room at art house, garage parking, property management on site, maintenance on site, TCA on site. One thing that did come up, question that came up in this discussion from alderperson from the first ward, George McGonigal, was what are the playground, what are the play facilities like for children? There is a playground that looks to be age appropriate for like elementary school children there, and TCA said that that's not something that their primary population of young adults have children in their toddler and waddler stage. So they will be organizing trips to Cass Park and city parks where those toddlers and waddlers can play. George followed up with a question saying that vecinos said, or their issues were raised at council meeting, concerns when they were going through the approval process that, you know, the development is on the inlet, and, you know, to prevent or make sure safety, that there would be a fence around, and there is no fence around. So Danielle also said that they're going to be doing like traffic safety and so on, and I assume water safety or whatever with the families. But I think George was expressing concern about the fact that there, you know, this has 100% lot coverage. And I think that's why that there isn't a fence, but had concern about the safety for especially kids that are toddler and below. So that came up. I think some of you are already aware that the mayor is convening a task force to work on issues related to the 300 block of West MLK / State Street and its adjacencies. What that means is the awareness is that if anything specific is done in the 300 block, you know, the goal is not to then push it to nearby places and have it continue there. And also that blocks near the 300 block are also affected by, you know, all the issues that have been discussed in this committee before that, you know, Tracy and Teresa, and I think all of you have observed in that area. So it's a the membership of the task force is fairly small. There may still be people joining, but there is a appointee, there's alderperson from the second ward, Duxon Wen is on, as is Amy Hendricks from the county, Kathy Slaughter from HSC, representative from STAP, and
who's there from STAP? Excuse me, who's there from STAP?
John Barry and Michelle McElvoy. Now, they both want to attend. In the group itself, if there's voting items, there would be one vote from STAP. And DIA president, Ashley Cake. And the mayor may or may not appoint one or more other people to the task force. But the idea is the task force is relatively small, but they'll be hearing from a very large set of stakeholders, being called subject matter experts. So each meeting will have kind of a topical area, and then people with expertise in that area will be asked to come and talk to the task force members, answer questions, and possibly be, you know, asked to be available as a future resource. I think the idea, well, what the mayor would like is that recommendations to him by the end of March 2022 about projects that the city that seem the most viable types of projects for the city to fund. There will be funding allocated to a pot of, I feel like I need better words here. There's funding attached, meaning that the mayor will designate a certain amount of money. Different numbers have been put out there. That's why I'm sorry, I don't have confirmation how much money, but I'm thinking probably at least in the few $100,000 range. Then an RFP would be issued, and I envision that to be sort of very similar to what you see when the IURA issues an RFP, where the amount of funding that's available is stated, and the types of projects that would be funded is stated. That's unlike IURA, we're more general, where you have the different categories. And then it's published so that agencies or entities that think that they could undertake those projects can apply for funding. Part of this reason is because so when the task force design was being developed, what was considered were kind of what have been barriers to task force recommendations being able to be implemented in the past. And one of the main ones is funding. A lot of times task forces talk about things and develop, strategies, but there's no money to fund them. Another barrier has been seen as that there aren't project sponsors that are willing to come forward. We talked about that last month with the idea of this whole idea of a restroom, that this group really made clear that if there was a temporary restroom, there needed to be staffing, and no entity felt like they could take that on. So this is the task force is going to be recommending things like what you recommended. Okay, if I'm just using as an example, I'm not saying that they would recommend a restroom, but if it's this facility, here's what we see as necessary to be in that type of thing. So that then entities who want to take that on are working within a framework of what has been determined to be the recommended approach. So there's that. There's also the awareness that, I'm not sure if you all know this, you may know this, but a task force a few years ago, before the pandemic, was convened by the fire chief around homelessness that had a very broad membership. I'm not sure how the members were selected, but we're talking all types of service providers, all types of public safety, there were I would say probably between 20 and 30 people in the room each meeting, and there were recommendations that came out of that task force, and a lot of the things that were being explored by the task force were kind of needed to be reintroduced on various occasions because there were so many members of the task force that weren't able to participate every time. So the idea of having a smaller task force is that these people are, hopefully able to commit to the 12, it's a 6-month process, which will probably include 12 meetings, to be there and to really get a deep dive on all these different topics, to then be able to study the issue and possibly look at models from elsewhere, or decide what they think would be the best approach and then deliver the recommendations. It's not meant to be necessarily in any way like an exclusive membership, and like I said, the number of people could change, but the idea was to keep the task force membership within a kind of manageable amount of people, that these people could be there for the duration and kind of get to the end point. So that's kind of the high level about that. Do people have questions about the task force? Yes.
So the focus is on the 300 block of the street because of the problems with staff, or why is the focus just there, really?
I think the focus is there. Well, it's the 300 block and its adjacencies. So that means the other blocks along State Street, and kind of being aware of how people might see the quote unquote problem as being at the 300 block, but recognizing that there's spillovers. It's not just this one isolated block, but there's been a lot of activity there, as you've mentioned several times, and there are several vacant properties on that block
Yep.
that could be seen as possibly contributing to why there are gathering spaces and so on. But we've also, the city has also heard from the 100 block and other blocks that the kind of nexus that has been created or is existing now, I don't know if it's been created, is existing in the 300 block is also affecting these other places. So
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other question I had is, how does this affect the homeless money from HUD that, what's her name, Lisa Horn is going to be doing the report on? Could the money come out of there if there's some sort of recommendation?
could the money come out of the
Well,
home
I mean, it seems like that report is going on right now. This committee is exploring some overlapping issues. I'm not sure everyone is homeless who's hanging out
right?
in the blocks, but yeah, I mean, is that a legitimate use for the money that before we have to think of extra money?
So great question. And this makes me realize that Lisa Horn should be made aware that this task force is happening.
Yeah, when is her report supposed to come out, Anissa?
January.
Okay, I mean, it seems like your report is supposed to come out in what, March? It seems like there's a lot of maybe intersecting, overlapping issues there.
I think there are intersections. I just want to be clear, this isn't my report. It's the task force report.
Right.
And so to answer part of your question, Tracy, so just for review's sake, not because you don't understand this, but helping me orient it. So IURA will be getting Home American Rescue Plan funding in the amount of about $1 million. And then the city is getting a separate pot of ARP funding as well. City's
Okay.
getting multiple millions of dollars more, like 13 million.
Okay,
The home funding that IURA gets can only be used for specific types of projects. And it is targeted towards homelessness, but it can't be any type of project. It can't be congregate shelter. It can be supportive services, but only for a certain amount of time. It can be for acquisition and development, as such as what you were asking Lydia about, Tracy. It could be for acquisition of an existing structure that would provide non-congregate shelter. But it can't be, it can't be like kind of anything that comes up. So, but I believe that you are correct, Tracy, that the city's ARP funding has a lot more flexibility about the kinds of projects it could fund. So while the IRA funding that's coming through, yes, is more targeted towards homelessness than the city's funds are, it's also restricted to types of services that can happen. Whereas the city's funding, I think, is more flexible, but it's not targeted towards homelessness. If that makes sense, does that make sense?
okay, yeah. And then there's county money involved in this too, right? I mean, county's getting money too, right?
The county is getting a lot of ARP funding too. They're getting about 17 million, I want to say. The city, I know this is a point of interest to the group. The city, like the mayor, like I said, has stated that the city will commit funds to this project. The county has not similarly been asked for that at this point. It's not that they won't be asked. It's just that the mayor was ready to get rolling on this and decided to get rolling in that way.
I certainly hope that the county is asked for money if there's, because I see this as a countywide problem, not just, I certainly don't see it as just the 300 block.
Yeah, and I think
it affects people living close to there in a way more tangible way. But county DSS is next door, and I've heard that they're having problems too. So
Yes,
When I walked by this morning, there was somebody sleeping at the front door, well, in the bushes to the front door of DSS. I mean, the bike, the back, the sleeping bag, the guy in the sleeping bag. So, I mean, this is a problem for them too, I would assume,
absolutely.
because there's no outside plumbing.
Yeah, and I think that others have also brought up that it's not only people who live in the city of Ithaca
Mm-mm.
that are there, that really people are coming from many places in the county because, you know, whatever, they come to Ithaca for a variety of reasons and don't have a place to stay once they get here, and possibly don't have a place to stay where they're, you know, coming
Mhm.
from. So
Mhm.
it's not, I think, so to your original question, I think it's seen as a quote unquote problem of the 300 block, and the focus is to try to understand solutions. So because that is like I've called it a nexus area, but it's also not to say that it's only that block, right?
Mhm.
So
And contingencies go, they don't just go up and down that street. They spread on other streets. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Plain Street, yep. Albany Street, yep.
Yeah.
Etc.
So that's why the adjacencies.
Okay.
Are there other questions I can answer about that?
No, I need to talk to you, Anissa. I know you asked me to report to the group sometime, so I would talk to you about that.
Okay, well, I can be happy to talk to you about that anytime. Oh,
Okay.
but I should let you know that I will be out next week. So no, actually, but I'll be working some of the time. So I could also talk to you next week.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that covers it for my staff report. Yes.
All right. I don't
Oh,
believe we
does
have.
Fernando have a question?
Yeah, just
Oh, okay.
with respect to the art house, I just
Mhm.
want to remind everybody that the city has money to build a bike ped bridge over the flood control channel
Hmm.
at the Cecil Malone alignment, which is right next door practically to the art house.
Mhm.
As far as providing an easy off-road connection to Cass Park, I mean, people are going to be able to walk or bike without getting on the road and be on the
Wow.
trail already, on the Cayuga Waterfront Trail. So that's, I mean, you're addressing the sort of recreation and safety that's going to happen. And then the city is applying for money to continue the trail along the flood control channel to Buttermilk Falls, which will also be a terrific amenity. And yes,
Oh, yeah.
the safety aspect, I guess, can be addressed and should be addressed in the design of a facility like that, whether it's putting a fence or whatever.
Um,
I was just going to ask if there's any discussion of timeline yet
For
the bridge and the continuation of the trail.
The bridge is likely to go to construction next year.
Where's it gonna go, Fernando?
The bridge will be at the alignment of Cecil Malone, you know, where Cecil Malone
Yeah.
ends and you make a right-hand turn. Okay,
Yeah.
right there, straight ahead. That's where the
And
bridge
just
is gonna go.
pedestrian?
It's the
Yeah.
bike ped bridge. Yeah,
Okay.
it's going to connect on the other side at Floral Avenue. You know, there's an extension of the Cayuga Waterfront Trail
Yeah.
that dead ends.
Yeah.
That the dead end alignment is on purpose, was always envisioned to be where the bridge was going to be. So
Okay.
when they built that extension, the reason it ends where it ends is because in anticipation of the bridge, which finally we got the money and it's going to happen. So,
Great.
Fernando just wondered, is that something, how do I best say this? Can I reach out to George McGonigal to let him know that if he doesn't already, and CC you if he wants more information, or does
Sure.
Common Council already know that?
Oh no, the bridge has been funded and it's in the program and in design and it's on its way. So the bridge is sort of a given, you know, it's planned and program. The
Uh-huh.
the extension to Buttermilk Falls is not certain yet. They applied for the money, but it's a competitive process. They may or they may
Okay.
not get it.
Okay.
So the Buttermilk Falls part is not. It's an application at this point, not a certainty.
It sounds like maybe what George is talking about, though, is that kids are going to get unexpectedly out of the house and drown.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I get that, and
Yeah.
and neither of these trails are at the art house location. So if there is a concern that kids may gravitate to the water, yeah, they should have some fencing
Yeah.
there. That is
Yeah.
probably not going to have anything to do with this trail. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
but as far as the residents there having access to amenities at Cass Park, the pool, etc., it's going to be on a bike. It's going to be 8 minutes away. I mean, it's just really
Right.
going to be in a safe 8 minutes off road. So it's going to be nice.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anything else for discussion this morning? All right. Well, thank you all. We will adjourn our meeting at 10:19.
Earl,
Yeah.
one last
Yeah.
thing. Do you mind
Yes.
staying on for a few minutes? I just had something I wanted to let you know.
Sure.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
everyone. Great to
Have a
see
good
you.
weekend, folks.
Take
Bye
care.
now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.